Hello, lovely thesis writers. This is Gabby from mythesiscoach.com. And today I thought that I would share a little bit of my own academic writing process. Now, I want to couch this by saying everybody does this a little bit differently. And as you grow as a thesis writer, as an academic writer, as an academic, you'll find your own process and you'll find your own groove. But I thought what I'd do today is show you my process, show you my groove, and you can see if there are bits of it that resonate with you and whether you would like to incorporate some of these into your own writing process. So just to an introduction to myself, I'm Gabby. I own a thesis consultancy, My Thesis Coach. You are very welcome to check out more about us at that link down there. But I'm also an academic. I've been at the University of Cape Town for over a decade. I have my own PhD. I'm a published academic writer in international and local South African journals. So I've been around the block and I'm very excited to share my process with you today. So let me start off by talking a little bit about what gets me excited. I take a lot of my writing inspiration from my teaching. And I know this from the very beginning. A lot of my ideas for my thesis, my PhD thesis, came from questions that I had about my own teaching. So I'm really passionate about teaching, and often I'll be in the classroom with my amazing students, and just something will grab me, something will tickle me, and I'll think like, "Oh, that's so cool." And at the moment, I'm having that as well. So I teach engineers, I teach communications to engineers. And recently I did this really cool writing exercise with these engineers where I got them to write poems. Now, I think that's really cool. I mean, people have these stereotypes. I know they're wrong because engineers are amazing, but kind of seeing engineers as very particular and sticking to the rules and very linear. So for me, this idea of teaching engineers poetry, getting them to develop their writing skills through poems, I think that's super duper cool. So that's an idea. Now that for me has triggered an idea for my academic writing. It's something that I'm feeling really excited about. I'm thinking as an academic, is there scope to turn this into a research project? So my first step, as I said, is coming up with an idea or an inkling of an idea, an inkling and a tinkling of an idea. And there we go. So now I have something. I'm interested at the moment in something to do with poems and engineering education. So the next thing that I would need to do, step number 2, is to do some exploring about what exists around this topic. Now, I've been playing with this tool recently. Let me show it to you. This awesome tool called Connected Papers. So this is it right now. And Connected Papers is an amazing way of searching academic literature to see what's out there on the topic of your choice. I'm going to do another video about this at a later stage, so I won't go into too much details now, although it is worth checking out, connectedpapers.com. So what I would do here is I would search engineering, education, and poetry. And then I ask it to build me a graph. Now, what it is going to do, you can see it working there, is I need to pick a paper that is seems like it's particularly relevant to my topic. So here we go, poetry and engineering education. That sounds about right. So let me click on that one. And then you can see what it's done now is it has built me this beautiful looking model of the papers that are related, the papers that are related to that one that I just picked, engineering, education, and poetry. And what it allows me to do is look through these papers. Like I said, play with it yourself. The closer the paper is, so that's the one that I just searched for. The ones that are closer are more closely related. The darker papers are more recent. But what I could do now is have a look at the field. It creates this visual map of the field for me so I can see what people have been writing. I mean, how cool is that? So here's one. You can see on the right-hand side of the screen that comes up the little abstract so I can find out more about the paper. Some interesting different experiences for engineering students. That sounds like it might be relevant. Personal and professional enrichment, humanities in the engineering curriculum. Cool. You can check that out. Anonymous electronic journal system. I don't know if that's going to be relevant. Here's the new course evaluation process. So this is a really great way of mapping out the field for me. So that's step number 2 that I would do now that I've got my idea, something to do with engineering, education, and poetry. What I would then need to do is spend some time reading over it, seeing what already exists in the field, seeing what people have said about it, seeing what people haven't said about it, because that could be a really fantastic place for my topic to come through. Yeah, and just getting a sense of what's there already so that I could see where my idea might fit into the picture. So once I've done that and I've got a general survey of the field, what I would then do is move on to step number 3. Now, step number 3 is one that we often want to rush over as academic writers because, like life. But step number 3 is a good, hard, solid think. And this is where I really need to sit down. And now, so I've got my area of interest. I've got a sense of what's out there in the field from my playing with connected papers. And now in step number 3, I really have to sit back and think, okay, what is it actually about my topic that I want to look at? Now, with that poetry and engineering education, there are so many ways that I could go. So I could go at it from the perspective of pedagogy or teaching skills. And I could make the paper about how I designed this module on how to write poetry and how the students responded. So that might be one. I could go more kind of humanities, literature style, and I could actually look at their poems and I could analyze their poems to see what they say about being engineers. That would be number 2. Let's think of so many more. I could take it from a learning perspective, and I could instead get the students' perspectives on what it's like to be learning poems as engineers. So I could do that. I could go from the learning writing skills perspective to find out not really about the poems themselves, but what is it about the poems that they learn from writing the poems? What do they learn about writing? So that could be another way. Yeah, maybe I could do some sort of fancy analysis on the poems themselves to understand better something about who the students are as individuals. That could be another one. So that could be like a professional development thing. I could look at who they are as engineers. Anyway, you're getting the drift here. Now I'm getting excited about my ideas. But I would have to really like take a long, hard think and think what actually is it that I'm wanting to do with this? And that'll be partly informed by all that reading that I did as well, feeding into that. And then remember, when you've got a topic that you're passionate about, you're not stuck with one forever. I could look at the engineering identity and then I could look at the writing. I could make it into 2 different research projects and that would be fine. But I think it's valuable. I always like knowing where I work towards. That's part of my process. So I would then probably pick that thing that I want to look at initially. And that would happen after some good thinking. Just to say, there are tools that can enable this thinking. So a research journal is a great thing to have just to be jotting down notes for yourself. I know some people enjoy using software like Miro, something that allows you to create a really cool mind map. That can be another way of doing it, where you're sharing your developing ideas. But I think best when I'm actually doing something, writing down something, drawing something. So I'd recommend the same thing for you. So that was number 3, was a good hard think. The next thing that I would do, number 4, is then I would decide where would I ultimately like to publish this research? What do I want to do with it? So that means thinking, are there any good conferences coming up? That would be an appropriate receiver for that. And then also, as academic writers, are there any journals that would be appropriate for that? As a thesis writer as well for you, that might be your direct link, is then I'm going to write a thesis about this. For those of us who are past that or never want to do that, a lot of that would be deciding where should I actually publish this? So there are different ways of doing that. For those of you who are in South Africa, you might find the department, this is the DHET accredited journal list. This is 2021. I haven't actually tracked down 2022 yet. But here is a list of all the journals accredited by the Department of Higher Education and Training. And I can pop that link into the video description as well for you. And that can be really helpful. I can then come and check on the various lists here. But I could check on Scopus and I could do a search for engineering education if I decide to go that route. And here we go. It's going to pull up, it's going to make it clear for me which are the ones about engineering education. So that would be one way to do it. Oh, can't look through a million of them, but so that would be one way, is to use the Department of Higher Education's list to help find a journal. Otherwise, just do a Google search, accredited journals in whatever the field was that you decided, or the direction that you decided to take your paper. So number 4 would be finding a good place to publish it. I always like to know a home. And listen, I fully accept the paper might not make it into that journal, and then that's cool. I'll just find another home for it. But I like to write with a particular direction. So you might find that this is helpful. Otherwise, just give it a Google. And then the next thing that I would do, step number 5, is I would then go to that journal. I would look at a few papers from that journal. I would look at how they're structured, the kind of language that they use. I decide, is that actually for me? Are they publishing the kind of papers, which is the one I ideally would like to publish? And the answer might be no. You know, sometimes journals actually turn out to be very theoretical, whereas you're interested in something more practical. Then it's just about going to find something else. But once you've found that appropriate journal, what I like to do then is create an outline for what my paper will look like. Even, you see, I've done nothing yet. I actually haven't researched it or anything. I haven't actually done anything for the paper yet, or for that research project. But I still like to go look at past journal articles, look at their headings, their subheadings. Journals will always have instructions to authors. I'll then go and look, how do they want me to organize the paper? I'll take that out and I'll create a little template for myself, which I can then work towards. And then you can see the final step, I've lost track of my numbers now, but the final step would be, okay, get going, do some research, do the analysis, find out the findings, write up a literature review. But because I did the important work of finding a good journal, of researching past papers, of creating that outline, I've got a very structured way to do that. So that there is my step, how I do academic writing from idea to implementation. I hope some of that works for you. Please feel really welcome to visit my website for more information as well. And I look forward to being with you again another time. Cheers.